All right, guys. So here we are. For everyone watching, I had major technical issues like about an hour ago. So I am using a phone right now to continue as how we used to do things and how we typically do things. Whenever I will be putting up some text and stuff like that, just bear with me as I get everything because it's all going through a little tiny phone for me to put some information up here. But I have my own personal phone here that I'm able to use throughout the process, and hopefully like the discussion will continue as before. Like I'm just sitting here watching right now. I'm completely wiping my computer clean right now, and so that's happening at the same time. Sorry if my mind's like in 5,000 different directions, but we'll just go ahead from there. All right, guys. So I was actually really excited about how last week ended up. I was actually pretty, I guess you could say, apprehensive about how people in general would take the content that we talked about last week to heart, like how that would be perceived. And I was really blown away by how much it just, I was completely blown away by like the positive, I guess you could say like the positive feedback that I received from this. And so if you think that last week was a bit of a ringer, this is going to be an interesting one as well. So I do have a few things to cover, as I always do. It seems as if every time I kind of backtrack a little bit. A couple things I did want to talk about. There are two Lamechs that are mentioned, one descending from Cain and one descending from Seth. And similarly, there are two Enochs, one that descends from Cain and one that descends from Seth. So I'm shooting a question out there for anyone who's able to respond right now. So we already talked about Lamech. Like you have the one who had the Song of the Sword, and then you have the other Lamech who was blessed. And so I'm also asking, like, what do you know about the two Enochs that are in Genesis 5, and I think also Genesis 9, maybe 10, I forget. Anything you know about them?
I think the one from Seth was seven from Adam, right? One thing I could remember.
Well, I mean, they both come from Adam.
And one walked with God.
One walked with
God. Enoch walked with God, and he was the seventh generation from Adam, I believe.
Yes. And and Enoch walked with God, and then also God liked him so much that he just took him. He just was not. It's interesting how that happened, and for me, it's really interesting imagery because it does say that Enoch had a son. And that line did continue onward, but God was so loved their relationship so much that he decided to take Enoch. The actual meaning of that, is really up in the air. I will say that this particular section is a little bit difficult for me. Do I think it has anything to do with salvation? Absolutely not. But personally, this is something that I have difficulty kind of processing. But it is interesting that all it says is that God took him, and that's it. And it's really interesting. You have I think it's Hebrews where Enoch is mentioned again in the New Testament. The other Enoch really doesn't have much of anything. The other Enoch is just a forefather of Lamech. But you already know that Cain's line is very, I guess you could say, Cain's line is very. There's like a lot of evil that goes through there. There's a lot of misfortune that ends up going through Cain's line. And so when you have that, Enoch led to the Lamech who did the Song of the Sword. And it's interesting too that you have Enoch, the one that God just took, and then you have the Lamech that's talked about in blessing later. So I think it's very fascinating to see that both of them had an Enoch and then a Lamech. And that's all I have with that. Another thing I have to pose a question. It says that God established a rainbow as a sign that he would never destroy the world by a flood again. Now, my other question is, think about it. He's never destroyed the world again since either. So, So do you think that the door is still open for him to destroy the world by some other means? He restricted himself by flood, but do you think it's still possible for him to destroy the world by other means?
Well, he left the door open, didn't
No, he didn't.
he? Left,
He said, as long as seed time and harvest,
He did. Yeah. Well, so what was that whole section there with that?
Steph.
Hi, Steph. Wait, one second. Okay. So anyway, so yeah, you were just talking about like the situation that was going. What did God say in that whole flood narrative?
Covenant. Well, the earth remains.
When he establishes the rainbow. Go ahead.
Yeah, it says, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil, nor from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. So that could even refer to a flood. Mm-hmm. But he says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease.
Yeah.
So he said, shall not, but that's while this earth remains. So, the new heavens and new earth would probably countermand that.
Or reinforce it. There's a perception that he won't necessarily destroy the world. It'll just make everything new. So you got that whole section where it's like he basically did say, I will not destroy this world by flood. And he also restricted himself by saying, I'm not going to destroy the world again. It's not going to happen. And I think that's really interesting. And I think when you think about it, too, to the ancients, destroying the world did come in the form of the heavens above, the waters above, and the waters below just going like that. And so that flood narrative is the above and below waters just coming together. So God said, never again will I allow the power that separates the two like come back together again. I won't allow it. And I think that's a very profound statement. So God puts himself in a pickle there because we talk about some interesting stuff from there. Okay, I have a question about high places. What are high places? Because this is going to come into play later on, maybe not this week, but we're going to be talking about high places later on. So you will come across in reading the scripture this noun phrase that's called high places. What does that mean?
It's a place higher than other places.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, Linda first, if you want to go first.
I could wait. I always thought it was a place where they did idol worship, that was associated with it.
Right. It can be. Remember we talked, go ahead, Deb, what were you going to say?
I was just joking for a second. I just said a high place is a little higher than the other places around it. But
right.
The high place, I believe, is a place of worship that people have used, idol worship, but I think it's also something that the people of God used, because Jerusalem is on a high place. Mount Sinai was on a high place. So it's like contact between heaven and earth.
Right, exactly. You got it. Because it's like, remember, like we're going to soon talk about the Tower of Babel, and then making something that reaches toward heaven. And when it comes to understanding what a high place is, sometimes they are deemed good. Remember, we were talking about astrology and we were talking about divination. That like those two things can be used if the Lord so deems. So, like, the casting of lots is, in a sense, a form of divination. Same thing with the Ephod. It's the same thing with, like, when you look, for crying out loud, the Magi saw the star in the east. Those languages, those, I guess you could say spiritual languages are able to be tapped into. It's just, what are you using them for and whom are you using them for? And so when you're talking about high places, yes, there are also good things that can come from that. Solomon, for example, made sacrifices on a high place for Yahweh. Like he absolutely did. It wasn't for any other god. He made it for Yahweh, and it was deemed good and righteous. So yes, usually it's for idol worship, but it is also done in a positive way as well in the scripture.
Question.
Yes.
Is the Hebrew literally high place?
Beaumont. Yep, absolutely. It means like a place very high up. Yep. Yep. Usually like a hilltop. Yep.
I'm thinking it's interesting when you brought up Babylon building the tower. I wonder if they didn't build the tower in connection with the high place in the sense that they didn't have any mountains around them. They were pretty much a flat plain.
I'm not sure about that actually. I do know that in China and Japan. What?
I was just going to say I think it's geographically flat, pretty much all the way around Babylon.
Relatively, yes, relatively.
Yeah.
Our concept of mountains is by far not theirs. And but in China and Japan, I do know that like at the top of hills, like you will have these pagodas that stretch high up because they seem to be touching the heavens in that sense. Yep. Yep. But I don't know. It's interesting because like when we'll get more into like the concept of high places later. But I did want to lay that groundwork right away. Another thing as well is. Okay, yes, we need to talk about literature as well. So what, this is actually on the Bible Project as well, but what are the three types of literature that are pervasive in the scripture? For example, is it poetry? Yes, of course, that's one of the things about the Bible is it's filled with poetry. What are two other things that it's filled with?
Songs?
That's part of poetry. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
History?
Poetry is artistic language, by the way. Go ahead, what?
History?
Yeah, I would say narrative. History, a narrative is more like this happened before this happened, before this happened, before this happened. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and what about what?
Prose.
In prose, but there's a specific type of prose.
Specific prose.
Yeah, it's discourse. And you will encounter that. For example, yeah, usually prose discourse comes in the epistles, but when you're looking at the Hebrew text, there is also some prose discourse. And it talks like usually it gets mixed up with the narrative, and sometimes the three forms are very hard to distinguish. But we will also be delving into the concept of Hebrew poetry, and the prose discourse usually comes across in like law code. That's pretty typical there. It's like because like for example like don't eat this because that has the lifeblood of the animal in it. Like that's kind of like a bit of a discourse there. But
genealogy.
Oh, genealogy. Yeah, that's narrative. That's narrative. It gives this guy begat this guy, this guy begat this guy. Yep. All right. Another thing here. Sorry.
Joel. What about the instructions in the Torah, like Leviticus and Exodus? What would you call that? Narrative or instructions? Or
I would say more than talking about the law code.
Yeah.
I would say that it would be prose discourse more than likely. I would lean toward prose discourse because it says you shall do this because of this. And if you do this, then you do this. It's like that. It's that type of. But the narrative would be like, and then they sinned after they heard all this stuff. So then it goes more into the legal code. Mm-hmm. Two more things that I do want to review before we continue further. There are three primary aspects of gods in ancient culture. I've mentioned it several times before, but I do want to hammer it home today. So what are the three types of gods that are out there that are the most prevalent? Like the god of what, and the god of what, and the god of what?
The sun, the moon. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's like the yeah. But what do they grant? I guess that's another thing too. Like what do these gods grant? They oversee something. What do people like to see and take?
See and what?
See and take. Remember, we talked about that's a major theme that comes across that we cover in Hebrew literature. To see something and to take it. What can you see and what can you take?
Just about anything.
What are the main ones, though? Does anyone know?
Yeah, I'm lost which direction you're going.
Sex,
Oh, okay.
money, and militaristic power. Those are the three ones, and they will be repeated again and again and again and again. Sex, money, and power. And so like they accumulate wealth, they accumulate women, they accumulate like the military strength. It's huge, very, very big concept. And we will do this again and again and again. There are three verbs. We already covered two. To see something. To see something is usually experiential. We're going to be looking at this today if that happens, if technology bears with us. Taking something is also a major thing. That's usually when you put into action the thing that you want to seize hold of. And the third one is to know. Remember, this is like knowing good and bad, knowing something. And to know someone is usually a sexual reference as well. Yeah, those are the big three takeaways there. Sex, money, and war are big godlike attributes in ancient culture, as well as in the Bible you have knowing something, seeing something, and taking something. Those are big things. Okay, so that's all I got for that as of now. We did leave off in Genesis 9, but I have a big question to ask, and I would like examples, if you can come up with them off the top of your head.
Yes, teacher.
Does God compromise ever?
No.
No?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
When?
Depends on what you're talking about.
When does he compromise? Give me examples of any time in the scripture that you guys know of that God compromises. Yes, how?
Moses. He's going to wipe them out. Yeah. Moses intervened.
Exactly. Yep, right. We already talked also last week about like how he said, the day that you eat of this fruit, you will die. Yeah. But he doesn't. He shows mercy. Others?
What about also when Moses said that he didn't want to be speaking for God, so he gave him Aaron?
Right. That's another one. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he adjusts. He's constantly adjusting for our benefit. He constantly adjusts for our benefit. He doesn't compromise his principles, but he'll do what needs to be done to get something done.
And not necessarily for our benefit either. We're going to come across that as well.
Yeah. Ultimately, though.
Yeah.
Ultimately, yeah, maybe.
Our benefit or somebody else's that's bystanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say overall.
It's always for some benefit.
Yeah, it's for some benefit that, like, okay, like, for example, I can think of one example, one with Hagar. And God says, okay, just let her go because I'll protect her. Like, so for her benefit, like, you don't have to worry about this. I'll protect her. But yeah, he actually tells Abraham to listen to your wife's voice. Like, that's the other thing too. Forgot. Listening to someone's voice. Is it God's voice or is it someone else's voice? And one of the ways God compromises is by telling someone, listen to someone else's voice. It's okay.
Oh shoot, I can't remember.
Can't remember?
Yeah, I can't remember. There was an example that went right through my head.
Yeah, I'll say this. The Bible is full of them. Mm-hmm. They're everywhere. And I think that's another thing that we have to be aware of when we're going into the whole what does the Bible really say concept. One thing that a lot of fundamentalists, or I wouldn't even just say fundamentalists, a lot of like traditionalist type things say that God doesn't compromise, or that he doesn't change his mind on things, or that he always has like this idea. No, the Bible actually quite clearly says he will change conditions to meet sometimes to meet the desires or the satisfaction of humans. And it's not necessarily for a bad, like for example, it's like with Moses, he's not a good talker. If Moses would have had faith enough, he would have done just fine. But God gave him a compromise and said, okay, I'll let Aaron do it.
I remember.
Yes.
I remember Ezekiel.
Okay.
He told him to cook his meal over fire.
Yes, and he said, I can't do that.
He says, no way, I can't do that. God says, well, all right. Do
this instead. Not human, but and yes, absolutely, and it happens all the time. And we are definitely going to come into godly compromise in the next few stories that come up.
Abraham, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes.
How about if you find 45? How about 30, how about 40? How about 35?
Yep.
One of the reasons, Joel, one of the reasons I'm thinking that people think God doesn't compromise is because of statements like God is the same yesterday as he is today and he will be forever. But that doesn't necessarily mean compromise or dealing with people. That means he has the same character, but he's not it doesn't necessarily mean that he can't negotiate with us.
Right. Actually, it's really funny too, because it's like, you have to think of it that, because like think about it. It's like, am I? You can't use humanly thought, but like for example, it's like, if I decide to do one thing and then I decide, no, maybe it's probably better just to do this, it doesn't necessarily mean that my entire characteristics have changed. It might be, but like usually it's just like, no, I had to change a part because of something that comes up, and it's not usually for a bad thing. So like, yeah, absolutely. And it is weird because I think we put too much of a restriction on what God can do by supposedly non-restricting his power. Does that make sense? What I'm saying is it's like we put up these walls in order to protect our concept of God, but that's not how God truly is. And
none of those compromises did he use any authority or power.
Never.
It was always to his glory because he was merciful.
Absolutely. Yep. No, that's absolutely true. Like there's absolutely no issue with that. Yep. All right. So without any further ado, here we go into the wonders of Genesis 9. And we left off in verse 18. Now, I'm going to go slowly a little bit longer until the end of Genesis 11. As soon as we're done with Genesis 11, we'll do kind of a review, and then you'll notice that I don't spend too much time on little sections anymore. But anyway, so Genesis 9:18. The sons of Noah who came out of the boat with their father were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan. From these three sons of Noah came all the people who now populate the earth. After the flood, Noah began to cultivate the ground, and he planted a vineyard. One day he drank some wine he had made, and he became drunk and lay naked inside his tent. I'm going to stop there before I do anything else. One thing you have to understand is ancient cultures. I tried looking it up today, like several hours ago, and I just still couldn't find it, but I do remember coming across how intoxicating beverages were seen as very good. They were seen as a way to make someone happy or for someone to enjoy the pleasures of life. There are even creation stories where you have the first man and woman. I think it's somewhere in Mesopotamia, but I just couldn't find it today. Like where it was like the first man and woman, they didn't know how to produce children, so one god told one of them to drink a lot of wine and then just let everything happen from there. And that was seen as good, to be intoxicated when having children. You're going to see that that is completely not what the Bible says. Like any sense of intoxication mixed with sexual activity is very much bad. So there we go with that. So one day he drank some wine he had made, and he became drunk and lay naked inside his tent. So remember, we were talking about the concept of nakedness. Now, I did want to also mention that in Babylon, being naked in Babylon was, if you saw someone else's genitals, that was seen as punishable. It was very shameful to even just lay eyes on them. Now, that's potentially what's about to happen here. I do not believe so, and I do have textual evidence for that. So, so Ham, the father of Canaan, saw that his father was naked and went outside and told his brothers. So all it says here is that he saw. Remember, seeing can also be experiential. He saw that his father was naked, and he went outside. The Hebrew term actually means he went on the street. He declared it on the street. What?
No,
yeah. Like the word for outside means on the street. That's just the general word. It's hos, and it just means on the street. But it also means outside. But the way it comes across in Hebrew is that he went out and declared it. Now, I'm going to try to show what it's saying here in the interlinear. I'm going to try first to put it up here. If it's unclear, then I will use the phone to do so, once again, because I've been having technical difficulties. So Genesis 9, interlinear. Not Genesis 9, I'm sorry. I wanted to first, as I get this ready, I would like someone to look up Leviticus 20:17. Can someone do that, please? And when they have it ready, just read it out whenever it's ready. Anyone. 20:17.
I have it if no one wants to read it.
Please.
Okay. If a man takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his, it is a wicked thing, and they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, he shall bear his guilt.
Yeah, and that absolutely is a sexual indication there. Another one is Leviticus 20, verse 11. You're there. Verse 11.
Anybody else want to go?
If you have it ready, go for it.
The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them.
Mm-hmm. So there is a debate on what exactly happened with Ham and his father. And I'm going to present the three possibilities that could have happened. The first is that he had sex with Noah's wife. Potentially going back into Leviticus 20:11, where it says that if you uncover your father's nakedness by sleeping with his wife. That's potential. Another one is that he sodomized his father, and by doing so, because he sees his father, that's the same language that's being said in Leviticus 20:17. You see someone, and you experience them in that way. There's also a third one, which is interesting. By the way, the one where you have him having relationships potentially with Noah's wife is because Canaan is mentioned twice here. And it's potential that the result of this relationship that he had with Noah's wife produced Canaan. And that's why Noah cursed Canaan. The other one is just with the sodomy section. It's not clear how Canaan would line up with that. The third one, however, is that something happened where Noah was emasculated. So in that sense, the reason why Canaan would be cursed is that Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. If he was emasculated, he would be unable to have a 4th son. When you look at the genealogy of the next chapter, Canaan is the 4th son of Ham. And so in a sense, you have that he had that 4th son that Noah was unable to have. These are 3 distinct theories. No one knows. I'm just presenting what the theories are. Yes, Rochelle.
Question.
Yeah.
Couldn't Noah being emasculated mean that who saw him naked? Ham saw him naked.
Ham saw him naked, yes.
Couldn't that also mean that Ham had sex with his wife?
With Noah's wife.
That emasculated him?
Yes, potentially. Yeah, that you could say that, yes. And it does not make a mention of a woman in that relationship, but it is potential when you're talking about uncovering someone's naked. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
so
couldn't that mean that's how he was
emasculated? Yeah, because he took advantage and had a child that was yeah, it could be. Yeah, I would think so.
I tend to not. Yeah. I tend to not go toward the wife because it says Noah was uncovered.
Exactly, it does. But the thing is, though, is it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to me, though, that he would have been emasculated. However, you have 2 gods. Anu, in I think it's Babylonian, it might be Akkadian. Anu was emasculated by. I think it was Anu was emasculated. Let me check. It's a god, actually. Hold on. Thank you for the technical difficulties. I cannot easily see here. Hold on. Hold on, let me find it. Castrated. Okay, there we go. Okay, so in ancient Hittite religion, Anu is a former ruler of the gods who was overthrown by his son Kumarbi, who bit off his father's genitals and gave birth to the storm god Teshub. Teshub overthrew Kumarbi, avenged Anu's mutilation, and became the new king of the gods. This story was the later basis for the castration of Uranus. And that's the other one that was in my mind, was also the castration of Uranus, having to do with Kronos or Saturn. And you had, there has been castration stories. So it's possible. It's just weird for me on that one. But he definitely did something despicable. And that's clear in the story. But anyway, any questions, comments, considerations?
One thing in verse 24 of 9, it says, so Noah awoke from his wine and knew that his younger son had done to him.
Yeah.
So that would mean that somebody did something to him. And it doesn't totally add up to me because of the way he cursed Canaan, was that it was Ham that did it. I think Canaan did it, and Ham discovered it and announced it. And
I have seen that. I have seen that. Yeah, there's actually a huge debate why Canaan himself was cursed.
Why
yes,
why
that's the other one. Is that Canaan had the sexual relation? Yeah, go ahead.
Right, and because why would you curse Canaan, who had nothing to do with it, supposedly? Because if Ham did it. But if Cain did it, then it would make sense. Now, the other thing is...
Right, well, the other theory was... Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, if when you look up in your interliterary Bible thing, can you see what the word younger means there? Does that mean youngest or younger?
What verse?
In verse 4, at 24. Because if Ham, Shem, and Japheth, I believe Ham wasn't the youngest, or the younger. It was Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They're always listed as, and normally that's in chronological order when you list sons.
Mm. Yeah, it just said younger. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It just says younger in the interlinear. Yep.
Okay.
And the his is ambiguous. Yeah, so that's why, I forgot to mention too that yes, Canaan was also considered for being the source of the seeing. It is not clear. It definitely is not clear what happened, and I think intentionally so. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, usually it would be listed in order. We did have this conversation, you and I did before a couple weeks ago. I just totally didn't mention it here. There's also the concept though, if it's some sort of like emasculation thing that he would curse Canaan because he didn't have the fourth son. That's a thing too. There's several out there, and there's no one consensus, which is interesting. When you think about, there's a lot of consensus on a lot of different things, such as like the daughters of men and the sons of God, but this one, there is no consensus. It's really interesting. So,
yeah, they didn't actually give you enough information in the text here, did they?
Oh, that is one thing I did want to mention about literature is that, and I did mention it once before, but I do want to hammer home the literary concepts that we're going to be encountering later, is that usually any detail that's provided is important. Any detail that's omitted, not so much. And I think here is an example of that. The detail's omitted, but he did something shameful. So he did something that needed shame to be covered. And that happened with Shem and Japheth coming in with the robe behind them. Yep. I needed to check something actually. Garments. No, never mind. It wasn't what I thought. All right, cool. Anything else? I have one last thing about the word see. So in the Greek translation of the word see of the Hebrew texts, very often the word see is translated in a homosexual context. So instead of just saying see directly, there was like more like homosexual allusions that were being made in the Greek text. So, all right. Okay, that's all I got with that. All right, so he says, may Canaan be cursed, may he be the lowest of servants to his relatives. May the Lord, the God of Shem, be blessed, and may Canaan be his servant. May God expand the territory of Japheth, may Japheth share the prosperity of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. He lived another 350 years, and then he died at 950. Genesis 10, you have this is the account of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Many children were born to them after the great flood. The descendants of, and then it goes down here. Now I'm going to notice something interesting about timeline, and I'm going to be referencing this a lot because it happens more. In verse 5 of Genesis 10, it says, their descendants became the seafaring peoples that spread out to various lands, each identified by its own language, clan, and national identity. The whole language thing here is up for debate. It doesn't have numbers here for the years, but there's a slight discrepancy in terms of generations when it comes to the Tower of Babel. But it is also debatable that it falls within the same amount of years. So I'm just putting it out there, though, that you have some interesting tidbits of information that seem out of place or out of order. Another one, too, is the naming of Beersheba, which we'll come across later. Or like the naming of, I can't quite remember, but things are mentioned before they're described. And this will happen. Several times in the next several chapters. So I have a big point. I've already told Mom this one. Next verse 6. Can someone please read it? Even if you know what I'm talking about, just read verse 6. If you want to. Anyone.
I can. I had to get off the...
Oh,
Cush,
go ahead. Cush? You go ahead.
Mizraim, Put, and Canaan.
Okay, so we know where Canaan is, correct? Like, if I were to talk about the area known as Canaan, pretty understandable it's where Israel is, right?
Yeah.
Cush.
It sounds familiar, but I'm not.
Kush and Put. They're very, very popular.
Aren't they in Egypt or south of Egypt?
Ethiopia. Yeah, like Ethiopia and Libya as well. Yeah, and Libya. And so we got Kush and Put. And what is Mizraim?
Israel?
I am surprised that they did not translate this in our Bible. It's so clear when you read it in Hebrew. It's the Hebrew word for Egypt.
Oh.
So when they talk about Egyptians later, they use the same word, but for some reason our translations here do not say Egypt. I think that's interesting. Even in Arabic today, it's spelled M-I kind of sort of an S-R, or T-S-R if you want one to. The specific letter involved is one that we don't have. It's a sound we don't have. But it's M-I-S-R or M-I-Z-R or M-I-T-Z-R or something like that. And that is the Semitic word for Egypt. And it's so fascinating that they don't translate it as Egypt here, because you would think they would. They did with Kush and Put, but they didn't with anything else. So anyway, so the descendants of Kush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. Anyway, I'm just going to go down here. Kush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, and he was the first heroic warrior on Earth. I think we've come across another contradiction here. What happened at the beginning of Genesis 6?
Mighty men in the earth.
Yeah. It said, in those days and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. And then you had the flood because of things like this. And then you have Nimrod, the first heroic warrior on earth.
Well, the flood came in between.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So,
not what my translation said.
so there's new history being written.
Mm-hmm.
So
What does yours say, Dan?
Mine says that Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Let me go here. Let me check. I'm checking. Hold on. Technical difficulties. Please bear with me as I find it on my little tiny phone. Mizraim, Canaan, and the sons of Cush, Sheba and Havilah. It's debatable to be the first because he began as a mighty one on the earth. He began the mighty ones. Yeah, like he began the mighty ones, which to me is a direct contradiction with Genesis 6.
Well, maybe too that he began. Maybe it was post-flood. He was the first one after the flood.
Exactly. First one post-flood.
Maybe it's a
I personally feel it's a stretch. I really personally feel it's a stretch, particularly because of the other contradictions we've been encountering here throughout the entire span of Genesis 1 to 11. It's like, to me, and I talked about this before, it seems as if they're like copying and pasting and cutting and pulling and putting together and piecing together like a history. And to me, it's more like the detail, the actual detail is what's important, not the historicity of something. And so it did say, yeah, why would it say he began? To me, it seems as if it's saying like he began like a line of warriors, but it just said that every time that the daughters of men married the sons of God, that they created great warriors. And Nephilites are giants, which they talk about giants at some other point in in the text as well. Like
What's
you have
the Hebrew there?
Goliath.
It began, could be became. What's the Hebrew?
So I'm touching it.
It could easily be he became a mighty one on the earth.
Ah,
Rather than began.
the first time it's used is in Genesis 6:1.
Huh. Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it came to pass when man began to multiply. Yep. First instance is 6:1. Huh. And the next instance is Genesis 10. Huh.
Yeah, but you can begin to be something. You don't have, doesn't mean you're the first. If you begin to be something, it's like becoming.
Yeah, but to me, it seems to me that it's like it's an intentional repetition of exactly the same word when it talks about mighty warriors and heroic deeds.
Well, either way, Joel, he probably was one of the first after the flood. And
I agree. That's probably what the story is saying. Yeah.
I think the point here is the correlation is what happened before the flood started to happen again after the flood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the history is
I agree with that. I do agree with that. That it doesn't matter. God used the flood to destroy everything, and yet history is repeating itself again. Like,
right.
Not just it's just repeating itself in general. So, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I got a question for you about your. Is somebody else talking? I'm sorry.
What? One more time, say that again, Dad.
I just had a question about the translation here because I've heard this many times before. It says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And I heard that should have been translated, he was a mighty hunter against the Lord.
Yes.
I'm looking here. I'm looking.
Yeah, that was my question, yeah.
No, it's in the face of. No, it means before, as in like in my face. Yeah, like he was a mighty warrior in the face of. Could it be? Wait a second. I'm thinking of Jonah real quick. And in Jonah, God says that. Oh yeah, it could be. Yes, because the complaints and the sins get into God's face. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I could definitely see that. Yeah. No, and I was going to talk about how Nimrod was not a positive character. But yes, absolutely, yeah, because and then he tries to get Jonah to come to his face, but then Jonah goes away. But yes, complaints and cries do go into God's face. Yes. Yep, sin enters God's face. Yep. yeah, I could go for that. And then in verse 9 where it says this man is. Oh wait, no, you had a question.
That was the same one.
Okay.
The same one.
This man is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world. It's funny how today we call someone a Nimrod when they're kind of stupid. When they're like really, I guess you could say burly, but stupid. So it's funny how that.
What a Nimrod.
Yeah, what a Nimrod.
Yeah.
Same thing with Babel. Of course, there are false etymologies, folk etymologies, and stuff like that. But when you talk about babbling, a lot of people harken back to the Tower of Babel. So, yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like in the 80s, a nerd was a bad connotation.
Oh, yeah, right? And now it's like...
And nowadays, a nerd is the bomb.
Well, I have this to say here. You're talking about like the development of language over time. Absolutely, right. With that. Because we're going to be encountering certain words as well that change their meaning over time.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. But yes, you're right. Like the word narcotics. It used to mean like a catch-all, but now it's like a specific one. And then you have the opposite happens with words, where you have a specific meaning of them that branches out to be more overarching. So like decimating. Like to decimate before meant like 1/10 of. To destroy 1/10 of, and now it just means to completely obliterate. But anyway, and so it's like anyway, I'm nerding out right now.
Nerding.
All right. So he built his kingdom. Where did Nimrod build his kingdom?
In Eric.
It doesn't say. In verse 10.
And them?
Babel, Eric, Akkad.
Yeah.
He was Sumerian.
Yeah. And where did he go? Babylon was known to be to the east. Yep. And he expanded his territory to Assyria, building the cities of Nineveh. It's interesting that Nineveh is mentioned first there. That was coming attraction. Nineveh was like the arch nemesis of Jerusalem. It was like 100% like the enemy. So then you had Nineveh and Kala. Oh, so verse 13, Mizraim was the ancestor of the Ludites, Anamites, Leabites, Naphtuhites. But all these things here from whom the Philistines came, it's so funny. It's Egypt, crying out loud. Canaan's oldest son was Sidon, ancestor of the Sidonians, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, all these things. The Canaanite clans eventually spread out, and the territory of Canaan extended from Sidon in the north, and then to Gaza in the south, and east as far as Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim near Lasha. And then you had these are the descendants of Ham, identified by clan, language, territory, and national identity. Same thing with Japheth above. Then Shem, same thing happened. I'm just looking here to make sure that it's, big one. Verse 21. Can someone please read verse 21? I don't care who gets to it first. Someone just read it.
And the children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the son of Japheth, the elder.
So what do you know about Eber?
It's Hebrew.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of the Hebrews.
Right. It's debatable. But the word it can mean as a noun. It can mean the one on the other side. As a verb, it means to go to the other side or to traverse. And so, like, when you talk about the word Hebrew, it can very well mean the ones who are on the other side. This can harken back to the Jordan, when they crossed the Jordan. So they went to the other side of the Jordan. This is also hearkening to their uniqueness, how they're not with everyone else, they're over there on the other side. And so, yeah, Eber, E-B-E-R, is very much related to, it's said to be the father of the Hebrews, but it's not explicitly stated. The first time the word Hebrew, as in Hebrew, appears is when it refers to Abraham, actually Abram at the time. It was like he was the father of the ones on the other side. What?
Look at verse 25, though.
Yes.
Because
the first was named Intelligence Division, and because during his time the people of the world were divided into different language groups, and the brother's name was Joktan, the ancestor of Almadad. And so, I can see that.
So talking about Eber being divided or from the other side, maybe that was part of the other side.
It is, it could have also been like the other side of like the unity. Like I think that's what you're saying.
Before,
like the other side
before
of
the two was divided. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the other side of the division. Oh yeah. Oh, it's so interesting here. We got a lot of folk etymologies happening in these next few chapters. I'm just looking here to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Verse 30.
Verse what?
30.
The territory they occupied extended from Misha all the way to Sephir in the eastern mountains. Yes. These were the descendants of Shem, identified by clan, language, territory, and national identity. Conclusion. These are the clans that descended from Noah's son, arranged by nation according to their lines of descent. Sorry, I have to keep touching the screen here because it's trying to go off on me. So please. It's okay. Like, that's what I'm just doing there. Okay, anyway. Arranged by nation according to their lines of descent. All the nations of the earth descended from these clans after the Great Flood. And it is really interesting too. Going back to like the father of all those who play the I think the lute, or all of those who do ironwork. To me, and I'm just reiterating, it just the details are not what's important here. It's more like or not the historicity. That's the word I want to use. The historicity is not what's important here. What's important is the main concept, the details. Sorry, that's what I was getting at. Yeah, but we have just finished Genesis 10. All right, let's just do 11 real quick, and then we'll take a quick break. But I did want to get to the end of 11 here. So 11:1. At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began saying to each other, "Let's make bricks and harden them with fire." In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. And one thing about bricks is that they're mass producible. They just kind of like, I guess you could say how we would say is yellow pencils. They're all the same. There's nothing that separates them. So let's make bricks and harden them with fire. Then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the heavens. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world." But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower where the people were building. "Look," he said, "the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages." Notice he's saying let's here. Again, it's harkening back to Genesis 1. Let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other. In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world and they stopped building the city. That's why the city was called Babel, because it was there the Lord confused the people with different languages. I don't even have to talk about a common way that we can say that too. They just babbled along. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. And then you have the line of descent, but it's so clear. We know the story of Babel, but it's interesting too because it's like these people saw these things as something, these bricks, as things that would make them great. So they started accumulating these bricks and they putting them up and amassing their power. And so God scattered them. But this weird amassing thing will come back time and again. Just think of like with Egypt or Solomon or Lot and Abraham. They do it too. Remember, there's a section where it talks about Lot and Abraham had too many things that they couldn't cohabitate. It's interesting how this fierce grabbing at things is a very common human trait, and that happens here with the Tower of Babel or Babel. And but so anyway, the rest of Genesis 11. I'm just looking here. Oh yeah, Genesis 11. We have, once again, verse 14, when Shelah was 30 years old, he became the father of Eber. After the birth of Eber, Shelah lived another 403 years, had other sons and daughters, became the father of Peleg, and so remember division. And then it goes down here. After Terah was born.
Nahor.
Yeah, Nahor and Haran. What's the point about Nahor? I might be wrong.
Terah's dad.
Well, yeah, but...
Yeah, nothing.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, you have Nahor. Is there an issue with Nahor that you know?
No. I was just saying it was Terah's dad.
Oh, yeah, and then from Terah comes, was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran was the father of Lot. Okay, so understand that Abram and Lot were very much related. How would that be? It would be okay, so it would be his brother's son. So his uncle. He was his uncle, right? Am I wrong?
No.
Yeah, it was his uncle, right? Yes?
Wait a minute.
Terah was the father of Abram.
Yeah.
And Haran was the father of Lot. And Haran was Abram's brother. But Haran died in Orly.
Right.
Birth.
Yeah,
so,
right.
yeah, it would be
Yeah.
Right?
Haran. I was thinking Nahor. Never tied up in it.
Sorry, what, Dad?
Lot was Abraham's son, nephew.
Yes, yes. So Abram was his uncle. Yeah, this is important. And it's part of his father's tree, correct?
Correct.
Right. And this is huge. And but I'm just taking a look here. Anything else important? The rest is just basic stuff like talking about Sarai being unable to bear children. All right, and I'm going to stop with one quick thing. Genesis 12, very beginning there. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. Verse 4. So Abram departed, as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. He brought a member of his father's family with him. It's really interesting. So anyway, I'm going to have to stop there. I have to take a bit of a break. I'm going to stop the recording for just a little bit, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, guys?
You set that phone down.
Yeah, I will. 1 second. Okay, so hi guys. Back to regarding thank you guys so much for being patient with me when it comes to how things are going with the whole craziness with the technology. But anyway, so we did finish now. As of now, we have just finished Genesis 1 to Genesis 11. Remember, and I have explained this before, that 1 to 11 are crucial for the rest of the entire Bible. I am not joking, but I'm saying that you can pretty much find references to Genesis 1 to 11 everywhere. It's all over the place. I think Linda would know as well, when we've been in Bible study even before church, is how many references there are to things that happen in Genesis 1 to 11 in Song of Songs, obviously. But same thing too with Proverbs, same thing too with Psalms. When you're talking about the things that the kings do in Chronicles and Kings, very much it alludes back to what God told the people told humanity to do, and how he calls humanity to be. It's a lot of seeing and taking. And then when it comes to Jesus, it's everywhere. It's just so crazy, all these things that really link up. And to me, that to me is how the Bible is truly, the scripture does have that breath of God in it, like what it says in Timothy. That all scripture is written by the breath of God. And in a sense, it's like that, it is that inspiration in a sense that how in the world could over just millennia that all these little things end up so tied together. And I mean really tied together. And hopefully we get to see a little bit of that today, as we go into more in-depth things with starting with Abraham. Now, discussion time. I think many of us here know Abraham's story, but let's talk about the positive things that Abraham did, because there's a section, I think in Hebrews, where it talks about the faith of Abraham. What is good about Abraham in this whole thing? What do you know about Abraham that's positive?
He believed God.
He believed him.
He believed God. Yeah. He believed God, and
he's the father of the nations.
Yep, that's his name. Yeah, what were you saying, Linda?
That he did leave his country to go to the land that God would show him. He took extra people with him, but he did leave.
Right. I love that. He went a little bit beyond what God told him to do, but yes, he still had enough faith to go. Yeah, definitely. Why? So his positive attributes. So God chose Abraham. Why? He believed him.
Did Abraham? God said, "I know him that he will instruct his house." Is it Abram?
I don't remember that. Might be. I literally did an overview of all from Genesis 22 to 25 today, so it kind of blurs together. But yeah, I would say what?
He did say that he would teach his children.
Yes, it does say that. I do remember that.
Yeah. And
he actually
I
does
don't know.
so when he asked for a wife for Isaac. And go ahead, what were you saying, Dan?
I was just saying that it was basically God picked a random person. It could have been anybody, right? Within certain qualifications. You know, I'm thinking of down to his descendants, the chosen people and that type of thing. But what God was trying to do was bring out a group of people that he could work with, because he was having a very difficult time working with everybody at once. And I think he was just trying to focus. And Abraham won the lottery, I guess. But he had attributes that God was looking for.
Yeah, I would say so too. I don't think it was just a random selection. I do think that Israel, for example, was chosen in that respect, or solidified in that respect, particularly because they were rebellious. But with Abraham, I think he did have some positive attributes that God was wanting to work with. At least that's what the story seems to say. Now, any negatives?
He took a stowaway with him.
Yeah, he was there twice. What, Dad?
I said he took a stowaway with him. Lot,
yeah, he took
right?
a stowaway. I mean, that just gives the whole story, right? You don't really know if anything that Abraham does at all, and then all of a sudden, bam, he does something that's kind of against what God tells him to do.
No.
Another thing.
No, I think blatantly against.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I would say this. I've never heard it mentioned in church. It's blatant enough, but it's not covered. Now, his rebelliousness is at
times. There's a lot of things that aren't covered in church.
Well,
that are blatantly against God's word.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just I'm readjusting the camera here because it does keep continuing to fade out. I am really sorry about the technical issues. Usually it's fine, but all right. Anything else?
I didn't hear what did you say?
Other negatives. I'm just apologizing for the technical issues. But
The whole issue with Hagar.
Yeah, Hagar. That's a big one.
Yep. What about going into Egypt, lying about who his wife was? Was his sister instead of just his wife?
Yeah, that's not his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. A lot. I will just say this. Abraham misses the mark a lot in the story.
Basically like everybody, right?
Right. Everyone does miss the mark, but this is a perfect story of how this ain't some noble warrior that was so wonderful in all regards. Like, this guy had a lot of negative traits going on for him, and things that had happened.
It's part of being a human being.
It is. It is absolutely part of being a human being, and it's interesting because he is the father of many nations. And so, in a sense, the Bible is saying that, like, he's no one really special in that regard either. It's like, yeah, of course he's special because God pointed him out, but like he's also the father of many nations. And yeah, so it's interesting with that. I'm going to go down here. So yeah, once again, Genesis 12:1. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family. But then in verse 4, he goes with Lot. He just decides to join the throng. It's funny. And it says, but in verse 3 it does say all the families on earth will be blessed through you. And Lot went with him in verse 4. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife, Sarai, his nephew, Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. Anyway, it just goes on here saying, I'll give this land to your descendants. I'm actually going to breeze through a lot of the story because this is stuff that we can gather just by reading. I'm going to start picking out now because the Bible is actually focusing on one particular individual. You will have like now I'm going to start branching out a little bit and looking more at like the wide story of things. Hold on one second. So, all right. Anyway, so notice that Abram built an altar in verse 7, and he dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to him. He traveled south and set up camp in the hill country with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. And he built another altar. So there's 2 altars that he's already built. Anyway, so he lived as a foreigner in Egypt. And as he was approaching it, what does he tell Sarai? Overall.
Pretty hot babe, and everybody's going to lunch it.
Exactly. He says, he talks about her appearance and says that when they do what to you?
See you.
When they see you, they will say, "This is his wife. Let's kill him. Then we can take her."
Take her.
Right. So it begins.
Well, let's say you're my sister.
Yeah. So tell them you're my sister. Kissing you was like kissing my sister. Anyway.
Oh my God.
Anyway, then they'll spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you. And sure enough, when Abram arrived in Egypt, everyone noticed Sarai's beauty. And the I've always found this funny. Is how old is Abram at this time?
107?
No.
It's 70s. It's pretty funny. But I thought it was funny. But yeah, sorry about this. I'm a little bit focused right now. My computer, once again, I just want to reiterate, was completely white, and it's asking me this stupid startup question. So please just 1 second. Give me 2 seconds to figure it out. I'm just gonna pause this for 1 second just to get. Okay, there we go.
I just kind of find it interesting that Abram goes to Egypt and he's like, okay, these guys are going to take you and kill me. After God told him, go, leave your home, go, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. How does he think God's going to do that if he lets the Egyptians kill him?
That's true. That is one thing. He believes God, but he believes him only so far. And it is interesting that he says this, and he says, yeah, these people are definitely going to do this to you, without even really putting trust in God and what God's going to do about things. And that does happen later as well. But yes. And so what happened when Pharaoh took, anyway, it says, and Pharaoh was taken into his palace, Pharaoh. Abimelech, it says particularly that Abimelech did not know Sarai. But what does it say about Pharaoh? What does he do to Pharaoh? What does God do to Pharaoh? Right. He plagues Pharaoh. And so you pretty much know something happened to Sarai. It's absolutely, there's a sexual reference there, in a sense. And he gave him many gifts, but the Lord sent terrible plagues. And then he summoned Abram and said...
in verse 19, though, it says, I might have taken her.
Where? What verse?
In verse 19. He says, why did you say she's my sister? I might have taken her as my wife.
No, mine says, and allow me to take her as my wife.
Okay, this one says I might.
I'm going to check.
Maybe
I'll check
with another translation.
Yeah.
Cover up.
It definitely has a sexual inference here. Let me check there. What verse is that? 19. Oh, yeah, the word might is potential, but it's like, why, okay. Like it. Allowing me to. This is, I would say it's more allowing me to.
Okay.
To might, like to may, so I may take her, so I might take her, the past tense of may.
It's like a translation cover.
I wouldn't say it's a translation cover. It just might here can also mean allowed to. And yeah, so allowing me to take her as your wife, as my wife, yep, and he took her. And so it is interesting. Why didn't you tell me?
Oh, but wait a minute, though. That could mean, why'd you say she's my sister? Allowing me to take her as my wife, that doesn't mean that he did. He could say that would set him up to do it.
Right. It does, but it's interesting. And remember what I said. It's in the details that when this happens to Abimelech, it says particularly that Abimelech did not have sexual relations with her, but it doesn't say that here. And the inference is big because physical plagues did happen. Now, with Abimelech, they closed the womb.
But wait a minute, though. In the culture of the time, if he had taken her as a wife, he would have been defiled.
Yeah.
Abram probably would have been able to take her back. In the culture.
I know what you're saying. I do. And it's funny because it is, yeah, because we just talked about, like, with Noah and Ham and stuff like that and how that was, like, a major thing. Yeah, I can definitely see that.
They didn't have a problem with her being his sister, but if she would have been basically raped by Pharaoh.
But would that have been rape? Because he thought, it's
not in Pharaoh's heart, but as far as her being another man's wife and Pharaoh forcing her there, to be his wife, that's
I think it's interesting, and I think it's up in the air too, because it's like, why did Lot then say that here are I have two daughters that have never known a man before. Let them have your way with them. Do as you see fit, but don't touch my guests. It's interesting because
that shows you the status of women.
Right, it does. But it also shows it's like what is considered like despicable or shameful. It's kind of twisted when it comes to these stories here. And anyway, so it is very, very interesting with this. But anyway. All right, cool. I just wanted to make sure that everyone had any comments to that. All right, cool. So anyway, I love how it says Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and they sent Abram out of the country along with his wife and all his possessions. And then, he got something. He's like, why'd you do this to me? Take your stuff and go. Get out of here.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That's what the Egyptians told Moses, get out.
Yeah, that is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's not. And there were plagues, too. Yeah, there's that theme there with plagues. But, it is interesting with that. But then you have here.
I have a question.
Yes, please do.
Is it the same Pharaoh?
No. So the word Pharaoh in Hebrew is actually a name.
Okay.
So I can see what Rochelle's saying here. The word for Pharaoh is actually a name that it's kind of like saying
a title.
It's like a title. Yeah, but more.
Okay.
It's like he is. It's kind of like how we say Mr. President. It's kind of like how we say that. It could be there are many Mr. Presidents, but it's like a name that like you use as an appellation.
Abimelech's a title too.
Abimelech is.
Yeah, title.
It can be. It's potential. Yeah, because the word melech, it can. What does it mean in Hebrew? Anyone know?
Something about the God.
Not God.
Melech.
Melech is king.
Yeah, okay.
My father is a king. It's potentially what it means. Yep. Or my father is king. You can say it that way. Mm-hmm. But another one too. What was the other one? Melchizedek. We'll say that one. What does Melchizedek mean? Malki Freda. It means Malki means my king is righteous, or righteousness. It can also mean like righteousness is my king. It's not necessarily like meaning a god. It just means like I fight for justice. That what directs me is righteousness. Yep, it's interesting. But so anyway, we'll get to Melchizedek later. Anything else that we were talking about like with like Pharaoh here? Nope. Yeah, there are many pharaohs. So, all right, Genesis 13. So Genesis 13 says, so Abram left Egypt and traveled north into the Negev. Now, no, this is very important here. So I'm going to go down a few verses. Remember when I said that they couldn't support the livestock? Because there was just too much. They had accumulated too much wealth. And so he said, okay, let's not allow this conflict to continue because they started, their servants started fighting each other. And so it said, we're close relatives. We shouldn't be fighting like this. So you choose. Like, you choose. If you choose the right, I'll go left. If you choose the left, I'll go right, or however, something like that. Now, let's talk about directions in Hebrew. Front, forward is east. To the right is south. To the left is north. And behind you is to the west. Okay? Now, to go down is usually to the west, and to go up is usually to the east. But there are differences. But the big one to remember, forward is east, to the right is the south, to the left is the north, and behind you is west. So this whole thing is like, okay, if you go south, I'll go north. If I go north, you go south. What does God choose? He chooses east, which is very interesting. It's like, you choose this way, I'll choose that. Like, it's fine, I'll choose that way. It's interesting. Anyway, yeah, so it does, anyway, so they did do that. East of the Jordan Valley, the whole Jordan Valley, actually. So Abram settled in the land of Canaan. And then it was talking about the wickedness, and they sinned against the Lord. But the Lord told Abram, everywhere you go, I'll be with you. I give it to you. And then, yet again, he built another altar, which is interesting. He built a lot of altars to the Lord. So.
Is he making up for something?
Well, no, not necessarily. It's interesting though, because usually, remember we talked about Enoch walking with the Lord. And it's like you didn't have to have an altar necessarily. There's actually a reference here. I hopefully won't skip it, but there's somewhere in here where it says Abram goes back to where God was with him. It's actually there's a separation at some point. It's like, yeah, God tells him everywhere you go, I will give it to you. But yet there's a section where it does talk about Abraham going to the Lord, as if there was a separation. Hopefully I'll read it. But anyway, there's this whole.
It seems as if Abram. I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
It seems as if Abram builds an altar, no matter where he goes to.
It does. It does. It absolutely does seem that way. I'm not contradicting that. But the thing is, though, an altar to me means as if you're setting something up to recognize that you met God in this place. That's usually what happens in the Hebrew text. And so he places an altar to the Lord in this place. But I guess you could also equate it to putting the American flag on the moon. It's kind of similar as well. But anyway, all right. So then in Genesis 14, you have this whole war story that happens. And so then Abram had to rescue who?
Lot.
Lot. It's kind of causing trouble. He wasn't the cause of the trouble. He got caught up in the trouble. But if Lot hadn't gone with Abram in the first place, he wouldn't have to rescue Lot in the first place. So this is interesting here. Anyway, so then you have Melchizedek coming to visit Abram. And I will read it slowly here. After Abram returned from his victory over Chedorlaomer, and and that name is a very is actually a historical name as well. I'm not going into it, but I was looking into the history of what they called this battle, and it's interesting. There's no real true, no, I wouldn't say true, but like really any concrete historical accounts. But this battle goes by several names, and one of them is Chedorlaomer. But anyway. And all his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shavah. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, which is Jerusalem, or more than likely Jerusalem, and a priest of God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. There is reference to in the order of Melchizedek. It is, I think it's written in Hebrews again. A lot of Hebrews. But what is that? What does this mean? What is the significance of Melchizedek? It's actually a very Christian answer. So, what's up with that?
Well, I think you're referring to that Jesus is a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Is that what you're getting to?
Mm-hmm. What's that mean, though?
Well, the Mormons have elders that are priests in the order of Melchizedek.
Okay, I love that. Yes, so you have that with the Mormons as well. Yeah. What does that mean, though? Like, what does the order of Melchizedek mean? No, we're not. But we talked about Islam as well in this thing here. We've been talking about Islam and other religions. Yeah, so we're talking about Mormonism. If these elders are done in the order of Melchizedek, what does that mean?
It's supposed to denote, my brother was a Mormon for a number of years, and it's supposed to denote knowledge and wisdom and temperance.
Okay, I can see that. Mm-hmm. According to what the Bible is saying as well. Mm-hmm. Why did Hebrews? Stephanie, you're not wrong. I'm just putting it out there though. What's the significance of Christ being in the order of Melchizedek?
Well, I think what you're getting to here, Joel, is that he came out to greet Abraham from Jerusalem. Well, he came to Jerusalem later, and there's a major key a connection to that, and that he shared wine and bread, symbolic probably of the communion service in that. And he came out to basically welcome Abraham back for capturing all the goods and stuff. And he blessed Abraham. And he was a servant. Melchizedek was a servant of the God Most High. So he was definitely a worshiper of God, as in the Yahweh. So there's a lot of significance there.
You're right.
There's a lot. You could write a book on it, you know?
Yeah,
there's a lot of similarity between him and Christ with his return to the city.
Question: what is a priest?
He's an intermediary between. A priest is an intermediary between God and man and God. Is the primary thing.
So who were priests in ancient Israel?
The Levites and the sons of Aaron.
So, the sons of Aaron. Aaron wasn't born yet. This is the first instance in all of the Hebrew Bible where the word for priest is used, Cohen. So it's interesting that the word priest is actually used as an actual priest, but is not part of that line, that lineage. So this is a unique characteristic that priests can exist outside of the line of Aaron. And that's the point I was getting at there. So when you have Christ as well, where does Christ's line come from?
Melchizedek. Well,
Judah. Yeah. So does he come from Levi?
No, he comes from Judah and Jesse and the line of David. He's the branch of the Jesse.
And David wasn't a priest. so when it's talking about like Christ being in the line of Melchizedek, in the order of Melchizedek, it's because it's possible for priests to be there without without them being part of the appointed lineage. That's huge. We're talking about we're not going to restrict God's purpose of what priests are, but it could have easily been argued that I'm sorry, it's hard for me to actually try to put into words what this is, but you don't have to have a certain lineage to have priests. And the requirement in the Torah was also that you had to come from a priest. I'm sorry, I think Stephanie is echoing right now. Is it possible for you to mute?
Certainly.
Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. I do feel sorry about that, but with the technical issues, I can't necessarily see what's going on. But anyway, so so we have the order of Melchizedek. The order of Melchizedek is unique here because the Hebrew Bible is giving credence to there being a king as well as a priest, and these were completely separate things when talking about the Hebrew code. All right, so. So, oh yes, once it was bread and wine, of course. That's a huge thing. There's a whole thing that goes on with an oath. And notice that they make there's a place about an oath here. Oh no, that's Abimelech later. But here we go.
Abraham also paid tithes to Melchizedek, and that's what Hebrews make it clear about.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Then you have Genesis 15, where this is the beginning of the covenant promise. And so this is where God tells him, no, you're going to have a descendant. And he says, look into the sky. And I did have a picture. I do believe that it's because of the light pollution, it is weird because you don't see how many stars there are. Hopefully you guys can see rather clearly on the camera here. A perfect night sky has that many stars. It's crazy.
Oh, it's like a cloud.
Yeah.
A cloud of light.
And he basically says, count them if you can.
It's like in the desert in Arizona.
Mm.
Flying in the back of a pickup truck.
The black sky. Yeah, I've seen it twice myself. Yep.
You can see the stars. They light up the night sky.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
magical.
It's not dark at night because the stars are so bright because there's so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
And you go into the city and it's bright, but not for the right reasons. It's bright because of the city lights.
Mm-hmm.
But in the desert in Arizona, you can see the stars.
Another thing too, you're talking about how you can see the stars. I forgot, I never did mention this, and I have been meaning to mention this. In ancient Rome and ancient Greece, for example, they thought that the stars were holes in the carpet of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, it would be you would have heaven had a carpet, and there were small holes that riddled it and came through, and the heavenly light came through. But yeah, it is magnificent. And then God said, yeah, count these stars, and remember, stars are also equated to Elohim. And he says, count them if you can. That's how many your descendants will be. And so it talks about how will I know that this will actually happen? And he goes, well, bring me these animals. Now, then this whole thing happens, and he drives away the birds, and he falls, and he gets really, really tired. And God does something here. What is a covenant?
A promise.
It is a promise. He gave a covenant to Noah, and he said, by this, I am telling you, I will not destroy the world again. Here, there's something specific he does with Abraham. Usually, there's for example, when two great rulers or heads of tribes would have a covenant promise, what would they do? Linda might remember this from when Rusty preached on this.
Sign a contract.
But how? How would it be signed in a sense? It's not technically signed,
I
but how would
remember
it be?
they used to grab each other's, they used to hold each other's thighs or genitals
Oh, we're going to get to that later. Absolutely. Not yet, though. No. We're talking about more of like an agreement contract. The general thing is later. That's usually on someone's deathbed. But any like what about the sorry, like
that's
what
where
would
they
do?
Well, I think it says it here in the text as well. I haven't seen it yet right now tonight, but they basically cut sacrifices in half, and they laid them down in a line, and they walked through between the sacrifices. And basically said, if we break this contract, it's serious. And
if we break this contract, like the animals we're walking through. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
like maybe this happen to us if we break this contract. Yep.
Right. And I think that was usually between kings and different tribes that used to do that type of thing.
Leaders of clans. Yeah, exactly. Clanly things. Right. Yeah, because usually it's like small nations or even just entire nations. But what they would, just to reiterate, they would split animals in half, walk through them, and say, may our faith be like the faith of these animals should we break this contract. And it is written in blood by the spilling of the blood. And that was huge. Notice who doesn't walk through in this story.
Abraham. It's God that walks through.
Abraham does not walk through. God says,
right.
I will do this, and I will make sure this happens. And
right.
if my fate be like these animals, if it doesn't happen the way I tell you it's going to happen. That is, because remember, Abraham is like, well, how am I going to know? Well, this is how he'll know. Abraham doesn't have to walk through. God himself does. And that's really a crucial statement. It's like it doesn't have anything to do with what we do. It's what he does. And that's really beautiful when you think of what the Bible is saying there. Anyway, so go ahead.
Point of interest.
Yep.
In 15 in verse 7, he said to him, "I'm the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it." If Abraham didn't already know it, God was in the works before he told Abraham to leave his family. He brought Terah out of Ur.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't tell Abram to leave Ur. He told him to leave Haran. But Abram was with Terah when he came out of Ur, and God says, I brought you out of Ur.
He did, yeah. That is interesting. What do you think the implications of that would be?
That he was working with him all along. I mean, he was always there.
Yeah. And I think that's that is. Yeah, I never even thought of that. That's why I love this, because it's we can talk about stuff that I have a lot of material prepared. Don't get me wrong, but hearing stuff like that kind of just that's really cool. Yeah, and it's really cool how you find little things here and there. But anyway. Yep. So I would say, okay. Anything else that anyone has on 15 before we get to 16? All right, 16, the birth of Ishmael. So this is huge. Now Sarai. Okay, I already heard yours is NIV.
No, it's just New King James.
New King James. Okay, so we've been hearing a lot from the New King James. Anyone have any other translations that they would like to read? I have the New Living, which I could read. It's fine. It's fine. I'll just read mine because I think it's interesting, and I do want to compare what our Bibles say here. So, chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. Oh, by the way, what's the word Egyptian? I wonder if it's been translated as Egypt in another chapter, but that's another thing. Anyway, so Sarai said to Abram, the Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram settled in the land of Canaan. So can someone please read what their version, Mom with New King James or anyone else's, verses 2 and 3? I would just like to hear it.
Oh, Abram listened to, heard the voice of Sarah.
Okay, so that's what yours says, is he heard the voices.
He heeded.
He heeded. Yeah, okay. Anyone else? Okay, I'll just go ahead and say it. In the Hebrew, it absolutely does say, that he heeded the voice of his wife. And his wife took and gave Hagar to him. And it
says that in the New King James.
It says it in the New King James. Okay, yeah.
Hagar and gave her.
But I think what's interesting is, like, we don't notice this. Like, I have read Genesis many times, and it wasn't until the past couple of years that I actually noticed these seeing and taking. It is a pretty big thing here. Yeah. It is absolutely the same language that is said about, like, so Eve saw the fruit, thought it was desirable, she took it, she gave it to her husband. And this is the same thing. She sees Hagar, she takes her and gives her to her husband. Anyway, so Abram had sexual relations, she became pregnant, and she began to treat her mistress with contempt. And then Sarai said, "It's all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now she's pregnant. Now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me." I think that's interesting. What happened in the Garden of Eden when God said, "Who told you that you were naked?" The serpent, like, it goes, "She told me," and then she goes, but I was deceived by the serpent, and here you have the same thing. He goes, "I did this," and he goes, "Let's see who's wrong here, you or me." It's a very similar story is playing out, but Abraham is God's chosen. Like, this is really crazy.
He told me to.
Yep. So then Abram says, "Look, she's your servant. Do with her as you see fit." This is a playback to knowing good and bad. Like do with her in the way that you see fit. And the angel of the and then in verse 7, it mentions something very, very interesting. The angel of the Lord. I just want to make sure it was somewhere else. Yes, chapter 16 is the first inference of the angel of the Lord. Who's the angel of the Lord? Any guesses?
Well,
Okay, say God.
What
do you say?
It often refers to Jesus Christ before. It often referred to Jesus before he came to earth. Not always.
Usually.
A lot of times it was Christ before he was incarnated.
I would potentially say so. Yeah, like I would definitely say God.
Not always, but it would. And it basically, Basically, every time God interfaced with human beings, it was through Jesus before he became Jesus.
Well, in verse 10, it says, the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will multiply your descendants exceedingly."
This is huge. The angel of the Lord. Remember our discussion about the name before? How the name could be an attribute of God himself. Same thing here. The angel of the Lord is an attribute of God himself. So when you say the name, the angel of the Lord, anything like that, all of this means God. It's just different ways of saying God. And we also have God in English. We have God, the Lord, my Lord. Like it's like it's interesting, like all the different ways that you can refer to God, and this is one of the ways that you refer to God. Yep. And so you have anyway. I'm looking here. So the angel came down. He said, and he basically consoles her and says, "Don't worry, I will do this." Now, one thing that you'll notice about the angel of the Lord is sometimes it'll say, even in the same reference, like it'll say, the Lord will do this for you. I will do this for you. It will actually change pronouns. And it'll, not just pronouns, conjugations of verbs, but it's interesting. So, okay, so he's, and then the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her authority. I will give you more descendants than you can count. And it's interesting how it's basically saying, it's telling Hagar she had every right to run away, but the angel of the Lord said, go back and submit to her. Like there's something more that needs to be done here. You're pregnant and will give birth to a son, and you are going to name him Ishmael, which means God hears. And it does, absolutely, 100% the congregation does. For the Lord has heard your cry of distress. And what does it say in 12? He will be like, or he will be, not just like, he will be an animal. Yeah, he'll be a wild man, a very animalistic. Even though it's saying there's a blessing there, it will say your son will be like an animal. There's something, and remember we talked about the animalistic nature of human desire, and it's very, very much alluding to this. As untamed as a wild donkey, he will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives. And thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord, and she calls him the one who sees me. And then she said, and the Hebrew says something different. What does the end of 13 say to you, Mom? You have a New King James. She also said,
so I also hear seeing him who sees me.
Okay. The Hebrew says, have I seen the back of him who sees me? Like, have I actually seen his back? And what do we know about seeing God's back? That appears to someone else. Moses. It is interesting that God's back may have appeared to Hagar. It is interesting, and the Hebrew does say like it was his back. Anyway, so this is the whole well thing being named. She gave Abram a son, named him Ishmael. He was 86 when Ishmael was born. And then we'll do we'll do a little bit more here. Abram gets his name Abraham, which means the father of many nations, or father of many nations. And yet again, he makes another covenant. It's like this covenant is being reestablished and reestablished and reestablished. It's like this solidifying, and God very much does that in other stories. It's like, I'm telling you I'm going to do this. I'm showing you I'm going to do this. I'm showing you again that I'm really meaning this. It does happen. I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. You will be named Abraham. Is this the place where he says about like the sand? Like you'll be like as much as the sand. But anyway, the mark of the covenant, though, and this is the first time Abram actually has to do something about it, is circumcision. It is a physical mark of the unique distinction that his descendants have. And basically it's saying that you are forever, like your seed, where does your seed come through a male is the penis. So what it's saying is like, I am physically marking what your seed will be like, or where your seed comes from. It's a very distinct image, because in Hebrew thought, the seed of a human being comes through the penis. And also the same thing happens with Egyptian thought and other things like that. That was actually, the word for seed was the same type as you would have for a plant seed. Similar to how we have in English, but it was universal. There was no other way of calling it. And so by circumcising, it has that physical attribute of God distinguishing what comes from the seed. This will be repeated later when an oath is taken under the thigh. because like when someone sits on someone's hand, the testicles are on that hand. And it's funny too how the word testicles is very similar, has a very similar indication, like how we have the word testimony or testify or testament, like testicle. Like they are the embodiment of like one's, I guess you could say one's, not necessarily virility, but like one's, I guess you'd say witness. Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, witness. So when you have like God showing the mark of circumcision, it also has a lot to do with the witness that's being done through these people. And it's really fascinating when you get through that. Anyway, so it says every generation to generation on the 8th day, blah, 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 blah. Any male who fails to be will be cut off from the covenant family. And then her name, Sarai's name becomes Sarah. I'm not going to go into the etymology of that name because it's up in the air, but I will bless her and give you a son from her. And then he said, how can I become a father at the age of 100? And how can Sarah have a baby when she's 90? And then he said, no. So Abraham said, how about Ishmael? I will give Ishmael as that inheritance. And God said, no, you will have a son. His name will be Isaac. And I'm going to review this. Isaac. Sarah hadn't even laughed yet, so there was no indication of the laughter here. So it's interesting that God is telling him here, you will name your son, he will laugh, and it's really interesting. But then I will still also bless Ishmael, and he will be extremely fruitful and will multiply greatly. This is God saying that how I told humans to act before will take place through Ishmael as well. But my covenant itself will be through Isaac. And he will be born to you and Sarah about this time next year. And then he circumcised every male in his household, Abraham did. Ishmael was 13 when he was circumcised. Abraham was 99. And all the men and the servants and all that stuff were circumcised as a symbol of the covenant promise. And I think that's a good place to end for today. Any questions, comments, anything like that before I wrap things up? Nothing? There's a lot more left to go. We still got a solid 7 chapters left of Abraham. But anything else? Anyone?
How to get off of mute? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, do you think that he named Isaac before, or do you think the editors put his name in here?
It makes you wonder. It mentions Beersheba before it's named. So yeah. It's really interesting. But then it says that God said you'll name your son Isaac.
Right, I know. That's interesting. I was thinking while you were saying, before I got to that verse, I was thinking it was maybe it was just the editors saying that you're going to have a son Isaac. You know, and
it is interesting. And once again, it goes back to the whole. That's one last thing. In our modern perspective, that would be so contradictory to the point is you would doubt the veracity of the Bible at that point. But that's not how the scribes looked at it at all. It was basically more like a reinforcement or like a retelling of things. I mean, quite clearly, when you have the contradictory nature of the first few chapters of Genesis, it's like that. The scribes obviously saw things like this and preserved them because their job was to copy, and copy they did. And they had there was no issue with this. And I think it's interesting as modern observers of these ancient texts, that just clashes with the way we think. But anything else?
Go ahead. That's because we're looking at it from 20th century or 21st century eyes, looking at how things are done. And it was a totally different culture the way they did it.
It is crazy. I was talking to Mom about this recently. Is like, yeah, we're in an age with so much technology, but even think about it. 100 years from now, people will look back and see glimpses of what we experience, but they won't know the intricate details of our day-to-day lives. It goes back to what Ecclesiastes says, that really we're just like, we're here and then we're gone. We're just like vapor. You can't, it's meaningless. There's not necessarily, but like vapor. Everything's like vapor. And it is fascinating that when you look at the past like this, so when the scribes were writing these texts and they were looking back, to them, these things are also vapor, but there was a core message being brought through, and that's what we're focusing on, is this core message. How humans are often deceived by what they see as good versus what they see as bad, and how they desire things for themselves, even if it comes at the detriment of someone else. Yeah, it's interesting. Same thing with Sarah. I mean, look at Sarah. The whole thing with Tamar. No, sorry, Hagar, and she just tossed her out. Like, do with her as you see fit. It's really interesting. So, anything else? Okay, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So let's just give it to God on this one. Father, this has been a crazy night with me encountering these crazy technological issues, but here we are, having really still been able to cover the things we've been able to cover. It's really a testament to how you truly are keeping this meeting together. How there was that potential of us canceling, but how still here we are, still talking about these things, still getting really engaged in these topics. I just thank you so much for this possibility. And I know that others in this prayer as well are so thankful for this possibility. We come to you with open arms because we do see how intricate the detail is really woven through these scriptures. And we just thank you for having opened our eyes when it comes to this, just like you opened Hagar's eyes in the scripture. Father, we thank you for just allowing us to come closer to you throughout all of this. Thank you for keeping my own personal mind at rest when giving this information, and when my mind wants to focus on the issues that I'm having versus really just enjoying the moment of this fellowship that I have with my brothers and sisters. We thank you for everything that you've done to keep these things together. We thank you for allowing the technology to remain active for these recordings to go online. And Father, we just ask your hand of grace as everyone goes about their way. Father, may we continue to ponder these things and come together with stronger faith than ever. And Father, may we always continue to be willing to walk with you. In the name of Jesus Christ, we offer everything up to you. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so let me finish this recording here.